When historians recount the year 1917 in Halifax, their attention almost always settles on what happened above the surface. The catastrophe itself dominates the narrative. The collision in the harbor, the sudden detonation, the blast wave that shattered windows miles away, the firestorms that followed. More than 2,000 lives lost in moments, thousands more injured, entire neighborhoods erased, reduced to splintered wood, twisted iron, and drifting ash. In official histories, it is remembered as a singular moment of devastation, an unavoidable tragedy born of wartime urgency and human error. But that familiar account, repeated in textbooks and documentaries, only describes what could be seen. It overlooks what happened beneath the city in the weeks that followed. Because while the destruction above ground was immediate and visible, the more unsettling story unfolded quietly below the harbor, away from public view. In the aftermath of the explosion, Halifax was not thinking about mysteries or buried histories. The city was focused on survival. Relief efforts moved quickly, and recovery operations were framed as strictly practical. Engineers were dispatched to the devastated north end with clear instructions: clear debris, stabilize damaged ground, assess whether the waterfront could be rebuilt safely. Halifax needed answers, not speculation. Could the land support new structures? Were the foundations stable? Was reconstruction even possible? Excavation began as a necessity, not an investigation. Crews worked through shattered buildings and compacted rubble, cutting down through layers of destruction left by the blast. At first, everything matched expectations: broken foundations, collapsed cellars, twisted remnants of docks and warehouses. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then, unexpectedly, the ground changed. Workers began breaking through layers that did not belong to the city they knew. Beneath the recognizable remains of colonial construction, they encountered stonework that extended far deeper than any documented foundation. These were not shallow cellar walls or simple retaining structures. They were chambers and passageways positioned well below the anticipated limits of historical construction in Halifax. Their orientation immediately raised questions. The angles were deliberate. The layouts were consistent. The depth alone was enough to unsettle experienced engineers who had worked ports across the Atlantic world. Halifax had never required foundations of this scale. Nothing in its records suggested the presence of such extensive underground structures. Even more troubling was the stone itself. The construction did not resemble British colonial masonry. It did not align with known French building techniques, nor did it match typical maritime engineering practices of the era. The stone blocks were fitted with an accuracy that felt out of place, as though shaped according to standards far more exacting than those used in early Canadian settlements. None of this was discussed publicly. Newspapers focused on resilience, rebuilding, and relief. Official statements spoke of progress and recovery. Yet within internal engineering documents and correspondence from that year, a different tone appears. The same phrases surface repeatedly, written without elaboration and without explanation. Unforeseen infrastructure, unexpected depth, origin unclear. At the time, these notes were not meant for historians. They were working observations, brief acknowledgments of complications encountered during recovery. But they hint at something far larger than debris clearance. Photographic evidence supports this. Images developed in temporary darkrooms during 1917 show laborers standing beside stone passages that appear almost modern in their precision. Tunnel walls meet so seamlessly that even through the grain and blur of early photography, no construction joints are visible. Channels carved directly into bedrock display uniformity that suggests planning, not improvisation. These were not natural caverns. They were not crude storage spaces. They were shaped, deliberate, purposeful. As crews continued excavating, the layers beneath Halifax's harbor district began to feel less like a chronological record of settlement and more like a palimpsest, older constructions overwritten by newer ones, all following an invisible blueprint that no one could find in the archives. The deeper they dug, the further they moved away from anything that resembled accepted colonial history. And all of this emerged not because someone was searching for it, but because the ground itself had been violently opened. For a brief moment, the explosion stripped away centuries of accumulated soil and concealment, allowing something long buried to surface unintentionally. At first, the recovery teams approached what they were finding with caution but not alarm. In the aftermath of such a catastrophic event, unexpected obstacles were inevitable. The simplest explanations were also the most reassuring. If unfamiliar spaces appeared beneath the wreckage, they could be dismissed as forgotten cellars. If tunnels extended farther than anticipated, they could be explained away as abandoned storage routes or smuggling passages from an earlier era. In a port city like Halifax, such assumptions felt reasonable. Engineers and surveyors worked methodically, attempting to categorize each discovery within existing frameworks. Some formations were labeled as natural limestone cavities shaped by centuries of water movement. Others were logged as undocumented colonial structures, remnants of early construction never properly recorded. These classifications allowed the work to continue without raising uncomfortable questions. But as excavation progressed, those explanations began to strain under the weight of evidence. The first contradictions emerged in the scale of what was being uncovered. Certain underground structures exhibited load-bearing capacity far exceeding any practical requirement for the modest buildings that had once stood above them. These were not supports designed for wooden warehouses or small stone structures. They were foundations capable of carrying immense weight, far more than Halifax's waterfront had ever hosted in its recorded history. Then there was the stonework itself. Blocks appeared repeatedly with near-identical dimensions, shaped with such consistency that the idea of individual hand-cutting became difficult to accept. Colonial masonry varied from builder to builder, site to site. What lay beneath the harbor did not. The stones followed uniform proportions, as though produced according to a standard rather than adapted on site. Corridors introduced further complications. Some extended far beyond the known boundaries of any historical settlement. They did not terminate near documented docks or warehouses. Instead, they disappeared into darkness, continuing beneath areas where no construction had ever been recorded. Their direction suggested intent, not convenience. The scale of the underground network was perhaps the most unsettling realization of all. Halifax in 1917 was not a metropolis. It was a functioning but modest port city. Nothing in its economic or military history justified subterranean infrastructure of such extent. And yet, beneath the harbor district, the network spread wider and deeper than anything required for trade, storage, or defense. Among the crews, these inconsistencies were acknowledged quietly. Conversations remained practical, cautious, and restrained. No one spoke of lost civilizations or erased histories. But there was a shared understanding that what they were uncovering did not align with the timelines they had been taught. As more notes accumulated, the tone of documentation shifted. Early reports were detailed and descriptive. Later ones became shorter, more ambiguous. Precise measurements gave way to generalized phrasing. Photographs, once taken from wide angles to capture entire sections, began focusing narrowly on immediate work areas. By late 1918, decisions were made to backfill certain excavated zones. Officially, this was framed as a necessity for reconstruction. Stability had to be restored. Foundations had to be secured. But the result was the same. Entire sections of the underground network were sealed again, returned to darkness. What remains now are fragments, partial reports, scattered photographs, and the subdued recollections of archivists who encountered these records before some of them vanished. Yet even in this incomplete form, the pattern is unmistakable. The structures were too precise, too extensive, too deliberate to belong comfortably within the accepted narrative of Halifax's past. As excavation continued and crews pushed deeper beneath the waterfront, the nature of the discovery shifted from unusual to profoundly unsettling. What had first appeared as isolated anomalies began to reveal a larger, more coherent pattern. The deeper layers were not random remnants scattered by time or disaster. They were organized, aligned, structured according to principles that suggested long-term planning rather than piecemeal construction. The first detail that forced engineers to pause was orientation. Across multiple depths and layers, structures maintained the same directional alignment. Walls followed identical trajectories. Corridors ran parallel even when separated by meters of earth and centuries of assumed construction. Chambers appeared stacked in precise vertical relationships, as though each phase of building had been guided by an invisible template. This consistency should not have existed. Different eras bring different priorities, tools, and surveying methods. Builders separated by generations rarely achieve flawless alignment with older foundations, especially when those foundations are buried and undocumented. Yet beneath Halifax's harbor, colonial structures sat directly atop older ones, and older ones atop something deeper still, all sharing the same geometry. As the laborers advanced, they expected to encounter natural bedrock. Instead, they found stonework that defied conventional categorization. Blocks were substantially larger than anything used in colonial Halifax. Joints were tighter. The margins of error were almost non-existent. These were not hurried constructions meant to support temporary trade buildings. They appeared engineered for permanence. Certain chambers drew particular attention. Vaulted spaces curved with mathematical precision, maintaining perfect arcs across spans that should have collapsed under imperfect construction. The symmetry was striking. Even more surprising was the consistency of these features across different depths, suggesting a continuity of design rather than isolated innovation. Then came the water systems. What initially appeared to be simple drainage channels quickly revealed themselves as something far more complex. Channels were graded with precision, sloping at calculated angles that ensured controlled flow. Some sections widened deliberately, slowing water movement. Others narrowed, increasing pressure. Reservoir-like chambers appeared at strategic points, complete with overflow paths and containment features. This was not rudimentary drainage. It was hydraulic engineering. No historical documents describe such systems beneath Halifax. No maps. No engineering plans. No municipal records. The city's known water infrastructure did not extend to such depth, nor did it require such sophistication. Yet here it was, carved directly into bedrock, functioning as part of an integrated network. Photographs from 1917 and 1918 captured these features clearly. Laborers stood beside channels so precisely cut that their rough tools seemed almost anachronistic by comparison. Stone surfaces displayed uniformity rarely achieved even with modern equipment. The gradients mirrored principles used in contemporary civil engineering, not colonial construction. Despite this, official records remained strangely restrained. Reports mentioned earlier foundations without elaboration. Illustrations excluded the deepest passages altogether. Entire layers of infrastructure were condensed into vague terminology that obscured their complexity. This absence of detail is difficult to reconcile. Engineers are trained to document anomalies, especially those affecting structural integrity and future development. Yet here, the most unusual features received the least attention on paper. Even the stone itself raised questions. Edges were too straight, surfaces too smooth, channels too uniform. Tool marks, where visible, lacked the irregularity associated with hand chisels. They suggested methods of shaping stone that did not comfortably fit within the technological limits of Halifax's recorded past. As these contradictions accumulated, one conclusion became increasingly difficult to avoid. The deeper infrastructure beneath the harbor was not an accidental byproduct of successive settlements. It was not the result of improvised construction layered over time. It was deliberate. Someone had planned this. Someone had built according to a design that endured across generations, guiding later construction even after its original purpose had been forgotten. And whatever that original purpose was, it extended far beyond the needs of a modest colonial port. By the time crews reached the deepest accessible layers, the question was no longer whether the structures fit the timeline. It was how they could exist at all within it. As excavation reached greater depths, the discoveries no longer appeared as isolated engineering anomalies. They began to resemble fragments of a unified system, one governed by consistent principles rather than improvised solutions. What emerged beneath the harbor was not chaotic or unfinished. It carried the unmistakable signature of intentional design. The chambers themselves defied earlier assumptions. These were not crude storage spaces carved hastily into the earth. They were carefully proportioned environments. Walls met at deliberate angles. Arches preserved flawless curvature. Vaulted ceilings displayed symmetry that suggested mathematical planning rather than trial and error. Even after centuries underground, the integrity of these spaces remained intact. Some chambers were discovered completely sealed. Packed tightly with debris and sediment, they initially appeared indistinguishable from natural bedrock. Only when breached did they reveal interiors that looked undisturbed since the moment they were closed. Their walls were refined, their layouts purposeful. Nothing about them suggested neglect or collapse. They appeared preserved. Then came the massive circular structures. At first, these were officially described as old water systems or storage wells. But nothing about them aligned with known colonial practices. They were too deep, extending far beyond typical groundwater access. Their walls were too perfectly circular, maintaining uniform curvature throughout. Some were wide enough to hold several men comfortably inside. Others contained internal recesses and stone features that implied mechanical function rather than passive storage. Workers struggled to explain what these structures were meant to do. In private correspondence, some referred to them not as wells, but as engineered vessels. Constructions built for a specific purpose, though no one could identify what that purpose might have been. Support structures raised further concerns. Certain underground elements exhibited load-bearing capacity vastly exceeding the requirements of any building known to have stood above them. These were not foundations designed to support wooden warehouses or modest stone buildings. They suggested the presence of heavier structures at some point, or a design philosophy that anticipated loads never documented on the surface. The most bewildering discovery followed soon after. Metal was found embedded within ancient stonework. Not loosely scattered, not randomly trapped, but incorporated. Fused. Oxidized in patterns indicating extreme heat. In some cases, the stone appeared shaped around the metal itself, as though both had been formed together. The official explanation was simple. Debris from the explosion, fragments of ships, colonial metal fittings driven into cracks by force. But this explanation failed under scrutiny. The placement was too organized. The fusion patterns too consistent. The temperatures required far exceeded those of colonial forges or accidental fires. As these discoveries accumulated, a noticeable shift occurred in how excavation was managed. Certain chambers were resealed almost as soon as they were documented. Passages were backfilled. Access points were closed. Deep sections of the network were isolated from further work. Publicly, this was attributed to safety concerns. The waterfront needed to be stabilized. Unstable voids posed risks to reconstruction. Yet the pattern of closure was telling. The sections sealed first were always the most refined, the most structurally sound, the most difficult to explain within the accepted historical framework. The unstable, blast-damaged areas remained open for study. The pristine, inexplicable ones disappeared again. What remained visible was a carefully curated version of the underground landscape. What challenged established narratives was quietly removed from sight. And with each resealed chamber, the impression grew stronger that what lay beneath Halifax was not simply inconvenient to document. It was inconvenient to explain. By the final months of the recovery effort, it became increasingly clear that the work beneath Halifax's waterfront was no longer progressing toward a natural conclusion. Excavation did not slow because everything had been examined. It slowed because something had changed. The operations were not completed. They were halted. This shift is visible in the records themselves. Early documentation is confident and procedural, written with the assumption that every problem encountered could be categorized and resolved. Measurements are precise. Descriptions are direct. But as the work advanced into deeper sections, the language altered. Entries became shorter. Terminology grew vague. Certain details simply vanished from the page, replaced with non-committal phrases that explained little. It was as though a boundary had been reached.